My dear students, so today we are going to learn a most interesting topic called as budgets and types of budget. One of the important aspect of budget is public finance. Let's first understand the meaning of public finance. Public finance is about how government funds are handled in such a way that is beneficial to the development of country both domestically and globally. It also focuses on the responsibility of government to manage public funds and in turn to improve an economy successfully. The scope of public finance may be summarized as under public revenue. Public revenue concentrates on the methods of raising public revenue, the principle of taxation and its problem. It's public revenue through which the government reforms its various activities, in other words all kinds of economy from taxes and receipts from public deposits are included in the public revenue. It also includes the methods of raising funds. It further studies the classification of various resources from public revenue into tax, fees and assessment, etc. Public expenditure. In this part of public finance, we study the principles and problems relating to the expenditures of public funds. This part studies the fundamental principles that govern the flow of government funds into various streams. The government has to incur various types of expenditure in present welfare society. Various principles of public expenditure, economy, various policies including budget, etc. and its effects are studied in the branch of public finance. Public expenditure obtains that very similar places in the public finance which consumption has in a economy. Budget. The aspect related to the budget are studied like meaning of budget, type of budget, various sources of revenue and expenditure of government, sources of financing government deficit and so on and so forth. Public debt. In the session of public finance, various aspects of public debt are studied. In present days, government is performing various welfare oriented development policies and as a result public expenditure exceeds public revenue in the most of the cases. Under the circumstances, the government ensures the public debit, that is internal and external debit, effects of these debits on the economy, etc. Public authority or any government can raise income through loans to meet the shortfall in its traditional income. The loan raised by the government in a particular year is a part of receipts of public authority. Financial administration. Now comes the problem of organization and administration of the financial mechanism of the government. In other words, under financial or fiscal administration, we are concerned with the government machinery which is responsible for reforming various functions of the state. Economic stabilization. Nowadays, economic stabilization and growth are the two aspects of the government economic policy which got a significant place in the discussion on a public finance theory. These parts describe various economic policies and other measures of the government to bring about economic stability in the country. So, dear students, let's understand the budget. What is budget? A budget can be defined as an estimation of revenue and expense over a specific period of time and is usually compared and reevaluated on a periodic basis. The government budget, also known as the annual financial statement of the nation, is the annual fiscal statement that depicts the revenue and the expenditure of the country for the financial year. The government has balanced budget when its expenditures are exactly equal to its income. A deficit budget is one of the which the government expenditure exceeds its receipts. When the government revenue exceeds its spending, the government has a budget surplus. What are the types of budget? So, dear students, according to the government, the budget is of two types: balanced budget, imbalanced budget. Balanced budget. A government budget is said to be a balance when its estimated revenue and anticipated expenditures are equal, that is government receipts and government expenditure. Well, it implies that the government raises funds in the means of taxes and other means of balanced budget was considered as an effective check as an extravagant expenditure of the government. The government must exercise financial discipline and should keep its expenditure within the available income. The concept of balanced budget has been evaluated and classically economics like Adam Smith. Classical economics is a group of economists that believe in a doctrine of full of employment and laissez-faire policy. In a doctrine of full employment, classical economics explain that the market has tendency to reach full employment. The only condition required were wages and prices, flexibility and complete non-interference of the government in the economic activity, that they were termed as laissez-faire policy. Because of doctrine of full employment, classical school of economy advocated a balanced budget. According to them, government should keep the revenue and the expenditure to a minimum possible level. It was considered by them neutral in its effective on the working of economy, and hence they are regarded as its best. But due to recession in 1919 and then depression in 1929-1930, classical doctrine and its flexibility was questioned, especially by economics like J.M. Keynes. The economists who follow the school is called as Keynes school of thought. This school strongly put forth the role of government in the economic activities. In fact, Keynes proposed that the government and fiscal policies plays a dominant role in the economy. He proposed the concept of imbalance budget, especially the deficit budget during the recession and depreciation. Imbalance budget, surplus budget. When estimated government receipts are more than the estimated government expenditure, it is termed as surplus budget. When the government spends less than receipts, the budget becomes surplus, that is, estimated government receipts is greater than anticipated government expenditure. A surplus budget is used either to reduce government public debt or increase its saving. A surplus budget may prove useful during the period of inflation. In period of inflation, although there is a greater employment, there is also a tendency of prices to rise rapidly. Deficit budget, when estimated government receipts are less than the government expenditure. In modern economics, most of the budgets are of this nature, that the estimated government receipts are greater than the anticipated government expenditure. Deficit budget increases the liabilities of the government or decreases its reserves. Any country in the world is aiming to avoid a deficit budget, although the surplus budget is difficult for the country to achieve, and that is the reason of countries strike for a balanced budget in order to avoid inflation, unemployment, loss or other consequences. Keynes school advocated a deficit budget, especially the economy in going through recessionary or deflationary phases. As an after effect of Great Depression, the world started following the deficit budget, wherein a government plan its expenditure for development or certain neglected sections of society. After 1930, economists have discussed about a concept of deficit budget and various methods to recover a deficit. One of the various recovery is the same is public debt. What is public debt? Public debt is the fund borrowed by nation, government. Governments borrow from the people, banks, organization and other countries. It is an aggregation of all internal and external debt liabilities pertaining to a nation. When the government runs into a budget deficit, it must borrow funds from various sources. In the addition, government borrow funds for public welfare schemes, wars, nuclear program and infrastructure project. Public debt is also used for receiving a dysfunctional public sector enterprises. For example, US in May 22, the US owned a public debt of $30.49 trillion. Since 2000, United States debt has been rising. It has become a major concern for a federal government. This value includes intra-governmental debt owed to social securities and public debts such as bonds and treasury bills. There is a political strife between the Democrats and the Republicans on how to manage independence. The government facilitated taxes cuts and stimulus packages to aid people during the Great Recession and COVID-19 pandemic. But these measures led to rise in US public debt. Internal debt is the loan acquired from the people, banks or companies within the nation in the local currency. Internal public debt owned by a government, money government borrows from its citizens is a part of country's national debt. It is a form of the fiat creation of money in which the government obtains the finance not by creating its own but by borrowing it. Some internal sources of debit are central bank, commercial bank, private individual, unfounded debit. Disadvantages: unproductive loans, productive public debits in the long run in the interest of the nation. Public debt leads to extra wages. Public debt is considered as an easy money. It hampers the economic conditions. Challenge to a political freedom: external debit in the most of the cases is available to the government. Having more money often a political or diplomatic motive behind it. One cannot grow only just by using own funds, since the funds may be scary. Debit is a double-edged sword. In this case, there is no constant increase in the sales. The government remains stagnated at the level of funds infused through internal sources. Debit is a tax deductible expenses. Non-usage of external funds may limit the exposure of the business to external expenditures. External debit. In contrast, external debit includes the funds drawn in the foreign currencies from other countries or international organization. External debt meaning implies a portion of a nation debt borrowed from a foreign institutions. Typically, government and companies do not prefer taking on this type of debt as it's giving a lending country leverage over them. Nevertheless, Pacific region compel a country to avail of financial assistance from a foreign lender. The country has to face a certain hidden and non-hidden cost in the debit, whether it is an internal or external debit. External sources of debit: foreign government, foreign individuals, foreign banks, international financial institutions. Disadvantages: it often leads to a viscous cycle of debit for a nation. Excesses of foreign debt can hamper a nation's ability to invest in different sectors, thus hindering a long-term economic growth. Loss of ownership for a corporation. External financing may come from the issuance of new stock. This can decrease the owner's equity and means of losses of ownership. Loss of control debt based on external financing normally means control of company is secure. Cost: the cost of external financing is a major factor, as debt involves a cost and as special to the future generation. The economics suggests that debt burden should be minimum. Hence, another method of financing the deficit budget is deficit financing. Let's understand the meaning and effectives of debt financing. I hope, my dear students, you must be clear with this concept of internal and external debt. Let's understand the deficit financing. Deficit financing. Meaning of deficit financing: deficit financing in advanced countries is used to mean an excess of expenditure over a revenue. The gap being covered by borrowing from the public, by the sales of bonds and by creating a new money. In India and in other developing countries, the term deficit financing is interpreted in a restricted sense. The National Planning Commission of India has defined deficit financing in this way. The term deficit financing is used to denote the direct addition to gross national expenditure through budget deficit, whether the deficits are on a revenue or on capital account. The excess of such policies lies in the government spending in the excess of the revenue and receives. The government may cover the deficit either by running down its accumulated balance or by borrowing from the bank system, mainly from central bank of the country. Developing countries aim to achieve higher economic growth. Higher economic growth requires finance, but the private sector is shy of making huge expenditure. Therefore, the responsibility of drawing up financial resources to finance economy development rests on the government. Taxes are one of such instrument of raising resources. Advantages and disadvantages of deficit financing. Advantages: in deficit financing, surplus money of the taxpayer is lent to the government and hence it does not bother the taxpayer. Here, additional money is created by borrowing from RBI and interest payment associated with the borrowing and return to the government. It increases the financial strength of the government. It leads to inflation, which can prove to be beneficial under certain circumstances. First, massive expansion in the government activities have forced government to mobilize resources from different sources. As sources of finance, tax revenue is highly inelastic in the poor countries. Above all, government in the countries are rather hesitant to impose never taxes for the fear of losing popularity. Similarly, public borrowing is also insufficient to meet the expenses of the state. Disadvantages of deficit financing are equally important. An individual government will have no savings during a deficit period. This is extremely problematic, as during emergencies there will be no stash to rely on. This leads to an excess of borrowing other nations, that to high interest rate. Excess debt continues to pile up and viscous circle is created. Printing more money. Printing more money does not increase economic output, it also increases the amount of cash circulated in the economy. If more money is printed, consumers are able to demand more goods, but firms have still the same amount of goods. They will respond by putting up prices. In simplified model, printing money just causes inflation. Printing money and national debt. Government borrow by selling government bonds, gifts to the private sector. Bonds are form of savings. People buy government because they cause a government bond is safe investment. However, this assumes that the inflation will remain low. If government print money to pay off a national debt, inflation could rise. This increases inflation would reduce the value of bond. If inflation increases, people will not want to hold the bonds because their value is falling. Therefore, the government will find a difficulty to sell bonds to finance the national debt. They will have to pay a higher interest rate to attract investors. If the government print too much money and inflation gets out of the hand, investor will not trust the government and it will be hard for the government to borrow anything at all. Advantages of printing income. With the economy battered by COVID-19 pandemic and dismissal gross domestic product GDP growth for the financial year 2020 and 2021, several experts have suggested printing money has an option to soften the blow of the economy. Nobel laureate Abhijit Banjre suggested that the India should print money liberally and transfer a cash directly to the sections of the society that need it the most. Uday Kotak, the executive vice chairman and a managing director of Kotak Mahindra Bank, also announced a similar opinion. The suggestion came even before the government releases its latest estimated economic growth for the last financial year that ended in the March 2021, stating that GDP ended 7.3% 6% in the 2020 and 2021. However, that happens when country prints too much of the currency. While COVID crisis has crippled economy around the world and have nations consider this option. With help, India in current situation in recession, with the period of deflation, it is possible of increase the money supply without causing inflation. Disadvantages of printing income. If government prints money faster than the government of real output, it reduces the value of money and this invariable causes of inflation. Government often restores of printing money when they cannot finance their borrowing by selling bonds. Thus, hyperinflation can be extremely damaging to the economy. If government prints money to pay off the nation debt, inflation could rise. If inflation increases, people will not want to hold the bonds because their value is falling. If the government prints too much money and inflation gets out of the hand, investor will not trust the government and it will hard for the government to borrow anything at all. With this, we covered the topic called as budget and type of budget. I hope you must be clear with this concept. Thank you.